Cool. I think everyone's filtering in. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome. Today is Thursday, February 12th, 2026. I will, and I'm just going to go ahead and get started, and Evelyn will keep letting people in as they arrive. This is the February Main Street, Rhode Island virtual roundtable, and our topic today, here we go, is parking part two. Part two because we've done part one already, and we're going to be talking about parking reform and how it relates to our main streets, our downtowns, and our walkable commercial districts. Thank you to our sponsors, Rhode Island Energy, who has been our founding sponsor, and also some support from Rhode Island Commerce. For those of you who are new today, just sharing that we're here as part of Main Street Rhode Island, which is the coordinating program affiliated with Main Street America. And what we are doing is trying to build capacity at the local level throughout the state to build, sustain, and nurture our walkable commercial districts as vibrant places for our small businesses as well as our communities. And the approach that Main Street America developed back in the early 80s and has studied ever since and proven to be true involves 4 points, all of which need to be intentionally and simultaneously developed in order to make commercial districts successful. So I invite you to learn more at our website or at the Main Street America website, which is mainstreet.org. A special shout out, welcome to those of you who are joining us today as part of our first ever Main Street Learning Cohort. We have 11 communities from around the state participating in a workshop series of workshops with Main Street America. Excited to have you all here with us today to hear a very special presentation. We're really excited to have with us Kevin Lowther. He is a third year law student at Roger Williams University School of Law and was a student and participant in the first ever Roger Williams University Housing Policy Lab. Last semester he studied parking reform and actually wrote state legislation that will be part of the advocacy agenda of Neighbors Welcome Rhode Island. He is an advocacy committee member, I'm sorry, advisory committee member of Neighbors Welcome Rhode Island, also a board member of Habitat for Humanity South County, and a former town councilor and planning board member in Westerly, Rhode Island. And as we learned just now, also a very accomplished professional musician. So, super excited to have him here with us today. I will allow him to share his screen and get us started. And while he does that, just a note. You may have seen we're recording today's session. Also, let everyone know we do have a rather large group today, so please do keep yourself on mute until it's time to start the discussion portion of the question or of the presentation. But if you do have questions in the meantime, please do go ahead and post them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that for you. And to get us started, if everyone wants to just go ahead and drop in the chat a hello, who you are, where you're from, we would love to know who's with us today. So with that, I say welcome and turn it over to Kevin. Thank you so much for being here.
Jillian, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you so much for bringing me in to this group to kind of let me share what I and my partner, Casey Rivera, I want to make sure that I give him a shout out because he's a big part of the research project and my partner in the Housing Policy Lab. Excuse me, Housing Policy Clinic. I also see Professor Teixeira de Souza lurking in here, who was our program coordinator and was absolutely fantastic in kind of making this happen, making this housing clinic happen at all, and then helping us to figure out exactly what we were doing and to help us link with our community partners, which in my case was Neighbors Welcome, a fantastic housing advocacy group here in Rhode Island that has a really exciting legislative slate coming up for the next legislative period. So you just heard that introduction of me. I came to Roger Williams Law School because of my experiences that I had at local government in the planning board, on the town council of Westerly, as a housing advocate. I believe strongly that a lot of the economic problems, a lot of the social problems in our communities really could be solved by better housing. I'm a housing advocate. I was the liaison to our first ever affordable housing committee when I was in Westerly. And I pushed for policies that would help us maybe create more public housing to keep more people in our communities. I just feel it's kind of important to share that background because this presentation I'm about to give is not really housing focused. It's focused on Main Street, it's focused on our commercial districts, but they're all so tied together, right? Everything that we do is tied together, especially in Rhode Island, this place where we have the highest kind of density in the country. We are all packed in. What affects one affects all, and it's all interconnected. And so, this opening graphic that I have here for this presentation is the same one that I used when we were presenting at the State House at the end of last semester. And it shows that relationship, two parking spaces can be the same size as, a studio apartment or a one bedroom apartment. So everything that we do is a trade-off. And so we have to be very deliberate in an environment where we have limited resources, especially when we have limited space resources. How do we best shepherd those resources, and how can we best make them work together? And so we'll be talking about mostly commercial applications of parking management, but I just want everybody in the back of their mind to be thinking about the affordable housing thing because that's where we started. All right, let me see if this will actually work. Okay. All right. So the problem that we have identified, and many states and many municipalities have identified across the country, is that we're overbuilding parking. There are too many parking spaces. And it seems counterintuitive when you hear it a lot because I think the average person on the street, when you tell them we have a problem with parking, they'll probably tell you, oh, yeah, like I have a really hard time trying to find a parking spot whenever I go downtown to downtown area X, Y, or Z, whatever that downtown area is, whether it's Westerly, where I'm from, like Patuxent Village or downtown Providence or anywhere else, Newport. People are going to say like, we don't have enough parking. I can't park wherever I want to. We are never going to be able to build ourselves out of that problem. There's just simply never going to be enough parking spaces for people to park right in front of the place that they're trying to go to. It's the same kind of problem that you might have with, let's say, like highways. Like, no matter how many lanes that we put into 95, it's still going to take 3 hours to drive to Boston from Providence on, 3 o'clock in the afternoon because the traffic there are always going to be more cars. You cannot satisfy that demand because every time you try to, you get more demand. And so the problems that we see with this excess parking problem, we kind of break down into four different main areas. The first one you see on the left there is the money. We know that it is expensive to create parking. So if you're a developer and you're thinking about making a multi, like a mixed use building or a multifamily building, you have to budget a lot of money for parking that could go otherwise to maybe adding a little bit more density, adding a couple more units, maybe adding more amenities, or doing something else. There's a real economic cost to the amount of parking that we have. Uh, then we have wasting land resources. Uh, it's like I said before, we're in Rhode Island and we know we have limited amounts of land here. If you are not building it for housing or for commercial establishments or some other more productive use, then and it's just all in parking, then we have a problem. Um, I put a bold here on decrease quality of life, and you can see that guy down there, I guess, juggling money, heart, and whatever the green plus is. Um, but like quality of life is one of those things that we're going to be talking about here because I think this is as directly implicates what happens in our central business districts. Do we have access to grocery stores? Can people walk to where they want to get to? Can they park in front of the buildings that they want to get to? Are they stuck in traffic all of the time? All of these things come together in this quality of life um, kind of metric that we have. And so that's kind of where we're going to live in this presentation. And then the last box is harming the environment. Does this parking spot, this impermeable parking spot that just creates more stormwater runoff, that creates heat deserts, will raise the temperature of the surrounding area. Is it worth it environmentally? Those four problems are kind of key to how we think about this parking problem. And so when we attacked this, myself and Casey, uh, we decided that we weren't asked to write legislation at the beginning of the process, but we thought as we kind of went on and we started to do more research, and we started to see that other states were starting to legislate these issues, that it would be a practical way to bring the issue up, also bring it to our state leadership, and to kind of organize our thoughts on it, honestly. And so, oh man, come on, you. Yes, I'm using Canva presentation for the first time, so you with me? Like it's on a little bit of a delay. Um, so in the proposed legislation that we had at the state level, what we want to do is reduce these parking minimums for single family, multifamily, and commercial development, eliminate some parking minimums for other uses where it just does not seem like parking is as necessary, including senior housing, um, you know, affordable housing, and smaller businesses and residences. And then we were also going to figure out a way to on ramp different communities of different sizes. You know, if you are an extremely small community, under 20,000, maybe you would be exempt. And then we would have a timeline for other communities to join that. Some towns don't have a planning staff at all. And, it would take time to implement these. And we understood that. So maybe a 15-month, 18-month time to horizon for mid-sized towns and cities, whereas it would be almost immediate for larger cities like Providence and Cranston that do have kind of robust planning capabilities. And I'm gonna pause here real quick just to make sure that everybody understands what we mean when I say parking minimums. Right now, in every town, in almost every town in Rhode Island, there's a couple who have eliminated parking minimums, but in almost every town in Rhode Island, you have ordinances that essentially control how much parking a certain zoning use requires. So, for example, most residential zones require you to have two parking spots per residence or two parking spots per unit of housing if it's a multifamily. Some say one and a half, say some say 1.25. And then it gets more complicated when you start talking about commercial establishments and start talking about commercial parking minimums. Most will have some kind of measurement of one parking space per every 3 or 4 customers, maybe if it's a restaurant. Sometimes they'll base minimums off of gross floor area and say, one parking spot per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area. But all of these parking minimums combined, what they do is they essentially kind of lock us in to our existing infrastructure and what we have. It becomes extremely difficult for you if you're a new business owner, say, and you want to start a new business in a central downtown district, but there is no parking available. Even if your establishment, say if it's a Dell's lemonade stand, and you realize that people are going to be walking up to your stand, you don't really have any seating, but that ordinance that you have in your town or your city that might still require you to put in 4 or 6 parking spaces, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It's restricting our ability for small businesses to come in to these downtown areas and to help just strengthen our communities. And so for all these reasons, at the state level, we decided that we wanted to end the minimums or restrict some of the minimums. Now, all right. Oh man, see? All right. So a lot of our research, and any research that I think that anybody does on parking reform, you have to start at the Parking Reform Network. It is just an absolutely fantastic resource. You see, I have the link down there at the bottom, parkingreformnetwork.org. They have compiled a just a group of resources that are absolutely fantastic. And so you can see here on this slide, I have on the left side, I have a map of Providence. And on the Parking Reform Network website, they have major cities all across the US. We're probably not going to find any towns, any cities in Rhode Island other than Providence. But it's very illustrative of the amount of off-street parking that Providence has. 27% of the downtown is basically parking lots. And we're talking about here, I want to make sure that we're clear that we're distinguishing off-street parking from on-street parking. So this 27% of Providence being parking is parking lots. It does not include any on-street parking. If you included the on-street parking, it would probably be like 40% of the downtown. So you can see that this land area adds up very, very quickly. One other thing that the Parking Reform Network has was municipal ordinances and state legislation. And so you can go in and just look by state. You can look by state, like it'll have on a map there. You can just click on different municipalities and it will link to their ordinances. You can see when they put in parking bans or any kind of thing. It just made doing research so much more streamlined because it was all there. It also has these different resources for advocacy if you decide that you do want to pursue some of the strategies we're going to talk about a little bit later in your communities. It has lots of resources for advocacy. It'll tell you what you should go and say in your local town council, how you could structure it, a meeting, if you wanted to have some kind of workshop in your community about parking, it's just fantastic. So, yeah, and then in the right side of the screen here, we have in the red all of the states that have currently enacted parking reform legislation, with many more that are considering it right now. All right. So I talked a little bit earlier about parking minimums and what they look like. I just wanted to provide a little bit of an example. And again, I have to shout out Casey here because he did most of this research. But I just wanted to take, this is not even representative. It's basically just like the first maybe 10 or so towns in our spreadsheet. But you can kind of see what the minimums look like across communities and how they're really inconsistent and almost inconsistent to the point where you you can see that they, I don't know, might not have a rational basis behind them. It might just be that we are making things up when it comes to parking, because we don't have a real good scientific, considered, engineered basis for having these minimums. You can see on the left side here, there's two single and two family residential minimum. Most have two spaces per dwelling unit. It starts to get a little bit hairier when you start to get the commercial minimums. Um, I mean, you can see that Bristol having one space for every three seats for assembly. So if you want to, build a church in Bristol or have a movie theater, you have you know, like a much higher parking requirement than even, Barrington, basically two towns over, just one space for every four seats, or in Burrowville, one for every five seats. Like, what is that? Um, and all of these minimums were also created in a very different era, in an era before rideshare, and so we have social reasons why these things have changed. It's an era before we had Zoom, before we had remote work, and so yeah, for lots of reasons, these minimums, I believe, need to be struck down or reduced in order to help revitalize our downtowns. Okay. All right. So, how does it actually look? So, passing legislation at the state level is, I think, well and good, and it's something that can really encourage communities to do their own parking management. But the real work in parking management has to come from the communities. So it is really on the municipalities to figure out plans that will make it work. Um, so Austin, and also, even though I'm using kind of bigger cities for examples, both of these examples come from kind of suburban neighborhoods within those cities. So they're maybe more applicable to Rhode Island than it might first look. So Austin, Texas is interesting because it kind of shows the two stages of what happens when you start to get rid of minimums. So there's an area that there was, they were trying to increase the density of, they got rid of parking minimums, so it allowed a developer to come in, and that developer basically built a more dense multi-family unit. A lot of students moved in, but they had cars, and so the developer didn't build a lot of parking or very much parking into it because they got rid of the parking minimums, which is what we're trying to do. But the students had a lot of cars. So where were they going to go? The students started parking in the surrounding neighborhoods. Um, and so other residents of that area started to get really annoyed. Obviously, they're losing all their parking to all these students. It doesn't make sense. So the solution that the city came up with was what they call a parking benefit district. And the parking benefit district is basically an area that you set up where you collect revenues from parking. So you start to either have I don't say a toll. You either start to have a meter or you do it through an app like many places we do in Providence as well, that collects money for parking in a certain area. And obviously that annoys people. Nobody likes to pay for things that used to be free. However, what it does is it manages the demand. When you have a resource that's completely free and like the first person that gets there gets that resource, you're not properly pricing in the supply and demand and making it work. And so that's what they understood in Austin is that we need to decrease demand for some of these parking spaces, or these students are just going to park here forever and they're going to take all the parking from all of the neighborhoods. So they put in the meters and they started. And the second part of that parking benefit district is just not just that it collects the money. It's that it takes most of the money it collects and it puts it right back into the infrastructure of the area where it is collecting the money so that you get more and better sidewalks and bike lanes and bike racks and benches for people to sit on if they're actually walking from place to place. And so it worked in Austin. They managed their demand on parking. It worked so well they came up with a citywide ordinance for parking benefit districts, and they expanded the program to come up with something called parking transportation management demand districts, which is a mouthful, the PTMD, which allowed not just residential areas to take advantage of the program, but allowed business owners to kind of band together, make an association, and apply for a district of their own, so that they can manage their parking better. And right now, there's many parking benefit districts and transportation management districts throughout Austin. Pittsburgh they had similar problems, but different flavor. So this nightlife district they're basically starting to have problems where its district started to attract more people. There weren't enough parking spaces that was flowing over into the neighboring neighborhood. There was some crime issues because people had to walk in the dark from these neighborhoods to get into this kind of entertainment district. So in instituting a parking benefit district, they were able to reduce the demand for parking in their district. They're able to increase their ride shares. So they got more Ubers and Lyfts out there because people didn't want to pay for parking anymore. And because they were able to, create a parking district for the residents. So you had a resident permanent pass to park in the neighborhood, and they started to get all of that traffic out of the neighborhoods and into Pittsburgh, into the district where they had more lighting and they had more patrols, and they were able to take the money that they made from that parking benefit district and pay for better lighting and pay for more police patrols and more infrastructure for that area. So it was. It ended up being very good for both the residents of the neighborhood and for the business owners in uh, in that district. All right. So I'm gonna Parking benefit districts is going to be kind of the solution that I talk about most during this presentation. There are a range of different options that are available to downtowns to manage their parking. And I know a lot of you were probably here last during the last last meeting where you all talked about Wickford Village and the parking study that was done during for that. You know, doing the parking study is the first step of managing your parking. You have to know what you have. You have to know you have to know what people know. Do they know that there is municipal parking? Where do they actually park? Where are they going? What are the peak times of demand? You know, and usually when they do these parking studies, they'll do it a couple different times of year so they can compare and contrast. How is it versus spring? How is it versus summer? In Rhode Island, it makes sense a lot of sense to do it in summer. It's like a high traffic time, and then maybe one other survey during another period. And so you will need to do that parking study. Um, you have to build community support for whatever you're doing. Clearly, especially if you're doing something like a parking benefit district where you're going to start charging people to park where they have not been charged before, you really need to build some support around that before you start surprising people with that. But like I said, the Parking Reform Network has some great resources for building that community support. Installing metered parking is a big part of this. You know, like I said, I think the best practices right now are metered parking based around apps, so you don't have to set up any physical infrastructure. So your costs are low in implementing this. But you might also have to have some kind of way for older residents or people without phones to pay for parking. You might have to have some retail or commercial establishment uh, that would to uh, help to accept payments for folks who couldn't. So this 85% occupancy is a target that um, the Parking Reform Network and others have called out as being kind of ideal occupancy. So you don't want your parking spaces to always be at 100%. Why? Because then if somebody wants to come to your establishment, they cannot. They're going to drive around in circles until they find a parking space further out. They're contributing to traffic, and they are not going to be. They might not end up coming downtown because they're like, okay, no, I didn't find my spot. I'll just come back later or whenever that is. So you always want them to be able to come and find a spot. So 85%, what that functionally looks like is like one spot available on a block at all times. And I think that's intuitive why. If this 51% revenue split, that's part of it. So municipalities will have options for how they want to split the revenue between the area that the parking is in the rest of the community. You do want to be able to spend some of that money on the rest of the community because you don't want it to be an equity issue where the rich keep on getting richer. Hey, this downtown business district is doing great. We're going to have parking. We're going to have people that can pay for parking, and so it's going to get nicer and nicer and nicer, and everywhere else in your town is not. So it makes sense to have most of the revenue go to that district, but also some go to the rest of the municipality. You have to figure out how you're going to monitor that parking, whether it's with police or whether it's with another kind of more civil agency. I would tend away from police. Police are expensive, and you put them out in too many places. Um, there are potential issues, but you have to figure out a plan for that, and figure out what you're reinvesting in. Is it going to be, like I mentioned before, bike lanes? Is it going to be benches? Is it going to be lamps, better lighting if you're downtown? What is it going to be? Better signage. That was a big thing of the Wickford, in the Wickford parking study. They said people can't find the parking because the signage just isn't good enough. So, do you invest in signage? And then obviously at the end of it, you're going to reevaluate to see if what you're doing is working. And then I'm gonna have to have like a bunch of questions, so you can ask those questions at the end if you have time. We can do that. All right. And then there's two main concerns that we've seen from businesses on parking management strategies is, hey, it's going to be fewer people will visit because you have to pay now. And then employees, what are you going to do about them? Um, to the first, what the research really bears out is that people, and is it just said my internet is unstable. Can you hear me still? Okay, cool. Um, what it bears out is that people who come to downtown areas and have to pay money, they are committed. They're in. So that is the customer that you want. You don't want the person who's like in downtown may or may not be there for a purpose. The other thing is that when meters first existed, back in like the 40s and 50s and 60s, business owners at first complained, and then they realized that it was turning over the visitors more quickly. And so you got more visitors and you have more traffic, and more traffic, um, not more like bumper to bumper traffic, but more foot traffic inside your business is always a positive thing. The employee one is a little bit stickier. It's tough, right? Because a lot of times the employees are the ones taking the parking spaces away from potential customers. So you have to figure out how to make that work. Sometimes some places have offered, shuttles from uh, parking garages further out, and in all those cases, um, uh, what's going on over here? um, Ghosts are drawing on my slides. Uh, but in all the places that offered things like shuttles, the employees just eventually chose to just come back and pay and pay uh, the meter anyway. And then it's up to the business owners to figure out how to manage their own transportation demand, right? So, maybe the business owner, could spring for a bus pass or whatever, or figure it out. It's it's not easy. There's like no perfect solutions, but I think on balance, these two concerns get um, I'm going to say defeated by the benefits. So other local solutions, potential transportation demand management, um, which can be incredibly complicated, but basically developers, instead of building parking, can have uh, a situation where the municipality will allow them to buy like a bike rack and put in a bike share or put in a walking path, and the municipality counts that towards their parking requirement, if a parking requirement still exists. And so there's a lot of different iterations of that. San Jose has this program. I tried to read their ordinance, and it is the most complicated thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's a difficult thing to get your arms around, um, but can be a viable solution. Sharing parking between businesses, much more easy to understand, and we see that in Patuxent Village, a lot, especially with banks that close that night, use it for nightlife parking. Everybody wins. And transit-oriented development is something that I'm sure folks have already talked a lot about. But that is my kind of formal presentation. Hopefully, that is enough food for thought to get us going. I definitely want to. Yeah. So again, thanks for having me. I'm down to talk about anything parking.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin. Um, I I feel like parking is really something we could talk about a lot. Um, yeah, I encourage everyone to post your yes, round of applause first, but please do post questions in the chat or feel free to raise your hand if anyone has specific things they want to ask or contribute. Um, I know as you were talking just now, I started thinking about, you mentioned parking permits, right, for residents. Um, did you in your research come across any examples of municipalities that offered like commercial parking permits for employees, right? That they could share with their employees to park in, like for, a residential area, which may be time limited for non-residents.
I didn't come across anything like that, but that's a fantastic idea. I really like that idea. You know, as long as the municipality is good about um, controlling that, you know,
Kevin, your
it is
internet is a
it's
little unstable.
you have to decide. You have to decide. Oh no, I'm not gonna. Oh God,
Um,
this is what I was
okay,
afraid of.
you're back.
I'm
No,
not
no,
gonna
you're
say that
back. You're back. It's
I'm
okay.
not gonna say that I'm in the Roger Williams Library, but I'm in.
I did
um,
want to, yeah, also
yeah,
wanted to give a chance to,
no, I like, and you really have to make an on. Oh no.
yeah, we'll give your internet a second to catch up. I did notice Jim from Central Falls shared a couple of comments in the chat with us. Jim, are you still on? Do you want to hop
I
on and
am.
say? Okay, great. Yeah. Do you want to say anything about your it says you recently reintroduced parking
Yeah,
minimums. You want to
yeah.
clarify
I
that?
noticed in the one of the charts that showed up, it indicated that Central Falls eliminated parking requirements, and that is true. In 2022, we eliminated all minimum parking requirements, regardless of development type, location, anything. Just no off-street parking was required at all. And for those of you who don't know Central Falls, we are very, very densely developed, narrow streets. I mean, not unlike a lot of other communities, of course, but just really feeling the pressure, right? So as more residential development occurs, which is something that certainly we have been encouraging and promoting, we need to be able to deal with that in a realistic way. We think about the effects that it has on neighboring properties and businesses, even close to home, city hall employees, right? So just kind of took a step back and um, rather than just say, okay, we're going to go back to what it was. We don't need, it's in our feeling, we don't need to have two spaces per unit. So we went back to um, take a look at the whole thing. And we for the most part, for residential, it's one per unit. We do include some bonuses, as I mentioned there, for um, TOD, really anything, and even a little looser than that right now, just anything where you can show that you're within proximity of a fixed transit route. For affordable housing, we also did a reduction, and it's down from 1 to 0.75 per unit.
Hmm.
So it was really kind of reassessing based on the impacts that not requiring any parking would have. So that's what those comments were about. Just wanted to make sure that there was an update there in the information.
Great. Thank you. Um, awesome. We have a question from Colleen for Kevin. Wondering if the project considered our aging population and the increased need for disability parking as people live longer. I do remember your presentation noting senior housing as being one area. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, and I'm going to turn my video off to see if that helps. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, that's great.
Okay. All right. Um, yes, and so I think aging is one thing we took into account. It's similar to we would hear about, families who have strollers. There's all kinds, and people who have mobility concerns. Um, I think there's a whole class of people who require vehicles to get around, and that is 100% true and will stay true. Um, One thing that we took into consideration was in reducing minimums for, say, and it wasn't just uh, elder care facilities, but it was also kind of um, 55 and up housing, commercial housing, and also the housing available to the government by the government, public housing that is age restricted as well. All of those uses do tend to have uh, a lot less parking, uh, a lot less vehicles, and so it made sense to restrict there. But yes, we very fully acknowledge that there's always going to be a class of people that just needs vehicles to get around, and that's why parking should be available for them. And parking and the and part of the deal with parking minimums and parking management is to make sure that parking is available for them, kind of near where they need to go.
I wonder if in the parking reform network on that same question, if you came across anything about like the number of um like accessible parking spots in the requirements. I don't know if that was a like part of what you looked at or
No, I think that's like a whole. There's needs to be some more, some more, more research into it. I definitely, I'm not the place to start with that. I know there has to be. We have to have handicap spaces.
yeah.
You have to have. It's just something that has to happen. I don't. The ratio or how it works is not.
Maybe the next class can look into that question. Yeah, so someone is asking if you are willing to share your slides. Uh, we can
Yeah, of course.
that would be great. Next question in the chat. Our Main Street in Wakefield has parking restrictions of 1 hour maximum. Signs that signs to that effect appear every so many feet. These restrictions are never enforced. I've asked to either enforce the rules or remove the signs. Rules that aren't enforced compromise all rule enforcement. Do you have an argument I can make to address this? I guess that goes to your the that part you were talking about the enforcement, and you said police were one option, but that there were other options.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have for sure. There's oh man, I forget what we're calling them in Westerly now. But we're not using police for parking enforcement anymore. You know, you can do it much more cheaply with, high school kids and college kids, who are wearing fluorescent Larson shirts, um, and you can have it not be expensive. And that's one of the other beauties of parking benefit districts is you can have it pay for itself.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I mean the main argument for parking for enforcing parking is that the local businesses are losing out. They are losing traffic and customers because the people who want there cannot get a parking spot. Um, and I think that's the strongest argument for enforcing downtown.
Well, I do see one hand up. Mr. John Flaherty, do you hop on?
Thank you. Hey, Kevin, it's John. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. A lot to think about. Um, my question, I wanted to come back to the two main concerns that you hear, which is, one was the fear that people won't visit their businesses if they have to pay, and then the other is where do the employees park? And my question is whether it's always a given that if you do take the step of implementing um, reduced or eliminated parking requirements, is it a given that you're going to be putting in meters and that there will be payment, or do some communities do it without requiring payment? That's part one. And then part two is I'd like to hear more from Jim about what was the main push in Central Falls um, to roll it back. But I'd like to hear your answer first.
Sorry, John, you wanted my answer first about Central
Well,
Falls?
no, Kevin. I mean, I'd
Yeah,
like to hear
yeah, yeah.
the whether it's always assumed that you're going to be implementing some kind of parking meters. That was for Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. And my internet is going crazy. Okay. So I will say that, even in if you read that Wickford parking parking report, they do not recommend meters as a part of as a part of that report. They recommend other solutions. They recommend better signage, better enforcement, relining some of their parking lots. Um, you know, there were other tools in the toolkit. I think, in particularly in that community, there was a concern about keeping it very traditional and keeping it, um, yeah, like really kind of keeping the heart of the and soul of the community. And so they looked for workarounds and other ways to do it. Now, if you do that parking study and you find you're at 100% capacity for 4 hours a day, then you might be more restricted in the tools that you can use to manage that parking. But Wickford seemed like they were close. I think they were like 95%, 90% for a couple hours on a couple days. So they could kind of tinker around the edges a little bit more. So it's just going to be very dependent on the situation.
Awesome, thanks. And then I think the second question was for Jim
Right.
yeah, to go back to
Sure.
what caused that that choice or that action.
Yeah, so it's a matter of sort of the existing reality on the ground. I mean, a very, very limited supply of availability of off-street parking, um, and congestion on the existing streets. So demands for the on-street parking as well. And so, I mean, we already have had a lot of housing activity over the last few years in terms of new development, but also with the state's housing plan, Housing 2030, another 320 something units um, have been targeted. And so, each one of those units needs to, we need to consider the effects of that. And rather than just, every application that comes before the planning board, um, people will generally comment about the parking. Where are people going to park? And so some people will make, sort of unfounded arguments, right? It's like, well, everybody has three cars. Well, no, not everybody has three cars, right? So it's not just a matter of, well, we better accommodate, the worst case scenario. So that's why we took a different approach. But it was really both a combination of what's already happening, what the existing conditions are, some new development already underway, that is going to be presenting problems, and then just looking at that additional requirement from the state, just really needing to be able to address that. Now, having said that, all this discussion about parking studies is not lost on us. We need to do that. We just needed to really get something in place relatively quickly, and we'll continue to take a thoughtful look at it. But that's generally what was behind it.
Okay. Great. Yeah, thank you. We're starting to run up on time. So Kevin, I don't know if you wanted to take a moment and mention the legislation that you worked on, and what we should all be keeping our eyes open for this session.
So, very clearly, our parking minimums law is one. Um, oh man, I think some of the other ones are definitely leaving my brain right now. I'm not gonna lie, as I stay focused on this parking issue. Um, uh, I believe one of them was the single stair uh, issue. That might have actually been passed last time. You know what? I don't wanna misspeak here.
Uh,
So
that's all right. We can send it as a
we'll have
follow-up
to
if
let you do that.
yeah, to we'll find it and we'll share it with everyone as the follow-up. And
Yes.
awesome. So
Fun.
that's yeah, that really is bringing us up to time. Thank you again so much for to Kevin for sharing your research with us and giving us this presentation. It was this very interesting topic. I know it's one that comes up a lot, lots of questions, lots of emotions about the topic. So always one we'll probably revisit many more times throughout, as Main Street, Rhode Island continues. But I also did post in the chat one of my favorite books, which if you haven't read is Paved Paradise by Henry Graybar, which all is all about parking. And it really is like a fun book to read. And who knew that parking could be fun to read about? But I really found it to be a great, enjoyable, and very interesting book. So we'll be posting this recording. We'll post a summary of Kevin's presentation. We'll share the slides. We'll share the follow-up legislation, and invite all of you to check out our next Main Street Rhode Island Roundtable on March 5th, again at noon. We're welcoming Main Street America to as a presenter to share with us about asset mapping. So if you're thinking about Main Street districts and thinking about in the same way that you start by thinking about parking by doing a study, an asset map is really taking a look at your whole district and identifying those assets as a place to start. So that'll be on March 5th, and we hope to see you all there. And until then, we thank you all for joining us. Thank you again to Kevin and to Roger Williams University School of Law for lending him to us for the day. and and yes, wish you all a good rest of your day. So thank you so much.